Welcome back to Recovery TV Live. We're here today talking about sexual fantasy, and in this segment we're going to talk about when it becomes unhealthy. So don't go anywhere. Thank you for joining us again for Recovery TV Live in this series that we're doing on sexual fantasy. If you're just now joining us or you're watching the rebroadcast version of this on YouTube, please make sure you like or subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to ring the bell so when more videos like this are posted, you will be notified. So we just did a segment on talking about healthy sexuality, or the role of sexual fantasy in a healthy sexuality, and now we're going to address when does it become unhealthy.
Right. And I think the basic criteria is whenever anything is taking over other parts of your life, you've got a balance problem. But specifically when sexual fantasy starts to become a problem is usually when that becomes more important than the sexual experience with your partner. And this also, kind of maybe what you're hearing makes you think, oh, that sounds like sex addiction. And I would say that that's very true, that sometimes people that struggle with problematic sexual behavior will have a problem with fantasy, but they're not mutually exclusive.
Right. So one of the words that, if you're familiar with the world of sexual compulsive behavior or sex addiction, you might have heard the term disassociation. Mm-hmm. And so when you use fantasy in a way where you disassociate so much that you're not present with your partner and you're more focused on the fantasy and into the fantasy than you are your partner, then that's usually when it becomes a problem.
Right.
The hard part is knowing how to gauge that. Like, how do you know when that's happening? And I think the best way to know is listening to your partner.
Yeah, and that's usually what you'll see in therapy is that one person will have feedback like, it feels like you're more into the dress up, the setup, the roles, whatever, than you are into me. Mm-hmm. And so usually that's going to be the first place that you'll hear that. Mm-hmm. And as people dig deeper into sharing what that's like, they'll say, I don't feel very important, I don't feel significant, I don't feel part of it. Right. That's kind of the feeling language that you'll hear. Right.
And so you might feel like that you're really present in those sexual experiences mm-hmm. with your partner, but if your presence isn't being communicated to your partner as presence, then there's a problem, right? And so that's why really listening to your partner and what they're saying on what makes them, if it's making them uncomfortable, mm-hmm. or they're saying that I just don't feel like you're present, instead of being offended by that and defending yourself, really try to dive into how they're experiencing you. And this doesn't mean that you completely remove fantasy from the equation, but you start reorganizing it in such a way where it fits for both parties involved and not just one over the other.
Right. And that, that obviously requires some bravery and good communication, and we'll mm-hmm. talk a little bit more about what makes this hard to talk about for couples in the next segment. But I would say that a lot of times, we talked about this in the first part of today, sex fantasy is about playfulness, and sometimes things just aren't fun anymore. And right. it's okay that it's run its course. It doesn't mean that you have to abandon playing altogether. It means that, okay, if that's not fun anymore, what do we need to do that's different?
Right. So another way to kind of measure it too, then kind of piggybacking on what Carrie's saying there, is that if it's simply interfering with any aspect of your life, particularly your relationship. So if it seems to be the focus of arguments that you're having, mm-hmm. or if you're consumed by the fantasy that you're late for work, or you're not paying attention in certain arenas that you need to be paying attention to other things, then that's kind of a telltale sign that you're getting that the fantasy itself is serving a different purpose right. than actually creating intimacy with you and your partner. Mm-hmm. And so that's when we start getting concerned or looking at like this looks like compulsive sexual behavior or possibly even sex addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and I think another, to add to that, another criteria to listen for is if you require that fantasy element in order to have arousal or to stay aroused and interested, if it's just that object or that play that's what's arousing you, getting you sexually charged, then that also is probably an indicator that it has too much power in your life. And usually how that presents in our offices is that somebody's feeling left out.
Right.
You're more excited about, whatever behavior than you are about us being together.
Yeah.
And so that's problematic because the goal of good sex is that both people probably have a good time.
Right.
And it's not just about one person having a good time because they got to engage in the play that they wanted to.
Right. So if that's something that seems to be happening in your life, we really would encourage you to reach out to a professional that knows how to navigate these treacherous waters at times. If the efforts that you've made seem to not be working, but to kind of also take the sting away a little bit. Something I say a lot to people is that if somebody's telling you that they haven't had problems in the bedroom, then they either haven't been together long enough or they're lying. So it's a very difficult, complicated part of a committed relationship, and at some point most people do have some trouble in that arena. So don't be ashamed by it, but also don't dilly-dally. I mean, it can become something much bigger than what it needs to be.
Right.
All right. Well, I think that will wrap up this the second segment of our sexual fantasy series. And so we're going to come back here in just a minute, and we're going to talk about why this is hard for couples to talk about. And so we'll see you back here in just a few minutes.